As the shuttle descended through the purple clouds of Valdres Prime, carrying Ambassador Elena Vasquez to what she hoped would be historic peace talks, she sat quietly in her seat, reviewing her notes one last time. The datapad in her hand displayed a petition to Emperor Caterus Eternal. It was simple. Humanity seeks equal representation in the Galactic Congress. Nothing more, nothing less. Her aide, a young man named Thomas Chen, sat across from her. He looked nervous, drumming his fingers on his lap. Elena could see why. The Valdres Empire controlled 804. They had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Humanity had only been traveling the stars for 200 years. In galactic terms, humanity was like a child trying to sit at the grown-ups' table. "Do you think they'll listen?" Thomas asked quietly. Elena looked up from her datapad and smiled. A tired smile born of years of difficult negotiations. "They'll listen, Thomas. That's diplomacy. Even if you don't like what we have to say, you have to listen. That's the law." As the shuttle broke through the clouds, the capital city of Curva spread out before us. It was cold, majestic, and magnificent. Great towers of black stone reached into the sky. Keck's claws, golden banners bearing the imperial coat of arms hung from every building. At its center stood the imperial palace, both a residence and a fortress. The shuttle landed in the diplomatic quarter. Elena stepped outside and was immediately surrounded by Valdres guards. The creatures were nearly 8 feet tall, with rough gray skin and glowing red eyes. They wore old-looking but well-maintained armor and carried ceremonial weapons at their hips. "Ambassador Vasquez," one of them said in a thick, human accent. "You will join us." Something about his tone made Elena pause. This was not her usual formal greeting. There was an edge to it, almost threatening. She glanced at Thomas, whose face was pale. "Of course," Elena said calmly. Lee led the way. They were not being led to a diplomatic reception, but to the throne room. This was unusual. Usually there were preliminary meetings with advisors, cultural exchanges, formal banquets, and so on. Going directly to the emperor meant something had changed. The throne room was vast. The ceiling vanished into the darkness far above. Pillars lined both sides, each carved with scenes of conquest and submission. At the very back, on a stepped platform, sat the eternal Emperor Caterus on a throne of blackened metal and bone. Keith was old even by Valdres's standards. He had ruled for 3,000 years. His skin was darker than the younger Valdres's, almost black, and covered with the ritual scars of victory, but his eyes still burned red with intelligence and cruelty. Hundreds of courtiers and officials lined the walls, representatives of dozens of races watching. Elena recognized some of them, the insectoid crashed bodies, the floating lumina, the people of the crystalline shards. They were all subjects of the Empire. They all looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Elena walked forward, head held high, Thomas following close behind. As she took her seat at the dais, Elena bowed slightly from the waist, a gesture of respect between equals, not the prostration others might make before an emperor. She saw Zulis's eyes narrow. "I am Elena Vasquez, ambassador of the Human Federation," she announced formally. "I bring a petition from my people to the Galactic Council, asking for equal representation qua silence," Zulis said. His voice was deep and resonant, echoing throughout the room. "You may not speak without permission." Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she remained silent. Things had already gotten worse. Catherine rose slowly, and a massive figure emerged from the throne. He walked down the stairs toward her, his footsteps echoing throughout the room. As he stood before her, he looked down with obvious contempt. "Humanity," he said, addressing the assembled courtiers, rather than Elena, "a species that has only just left its cradle world and knows nothing of the true power of the galaxy, stands before us with not a demand, but a request. They wish to be treated as equals to an imperium that has existed since before their ancestors learned to make fire." Laughter erupted from Valdres's courtiers. Elena noticed that the representatives of the subject races were not laughing. They watched in silence. "Your Majesty," Elena said carefully, "we are not making a demand, we are petitioning. Under the laws of the Galactic Council, every species in the universe has rights. The Galactic Council exists because it recognizes our existence." Cather interrupted. "It works for our pleasure. You humans have forgotten your place and become arrogant. You come to our home world, stand before our thrones, and speak as if you were our equals." Elena's heart began to pound now, but her voice remained calm. "We are equals. Under galactic law, all sentient species are equal. That is the principle on which this council was founded. Chaucer said we founded it 12,000 years ago, when humans still lived in caves and worshipped the sun. Don't preach about the principles we created. Thomas touched Elena's arm gently, as if to warn her. Elena knew she should back down, apologize, try to smooth things over, but she had spent 30 years as a diplomat, negotiating with warlords and corporate dictators, pirate lords and religious extremists. She never shied away from the truth. With all due respect, Your Majesty, she said, the age of an empire does not determine its right to rule other nations. Longevity is not the same as legitimacy. There was dead silence in the throne room. Zuli stared at her for a moment. Then he began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. How dare you, he said gently. How dare you question our legitimacy? He turned to the guards. Get them both. A guard grabbed Thomas's arm, and he cried out in protest. Elena didn't resist, and the guards seized her. Her mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. This was against every diplomatic protocol, every law of parliament. Your Majesty, we have diplomatic immunity, she yelled. We can do anything, Kutra said. You have been charged with espionage against the Empire. You will be tried, convicted, and executed. Let this be a lesson to all who question our authority. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This was insane. There was no evidence of espionage because no espionage had been committed. This was pure theater, a show trial to intimidate humanity and any other species that might challenge Valdres's dominance. This is murder, she stated firmly. The murder of a diplomat under diplomatic protection. The galaxy will watch and learn, Cathalis interjected. And that is the point. The trial, if it could even be called a trial, lasted 3 days. Elena was put in a small windowless cell. Tomas was in another cell somewhere. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. The guards brought her food and water but didn't speak to her. On the first day, she was summoned before the Valdres judges. The evidence they presented was clearly fabricated. Correspondence they had never sent. Records of meetings with resistance members they had never met. Sabotage plans they had never written. Elena calmly and meticulously refuted each piece of evidence. But it didn't matter. The judges weren't listening. On the second day, they seated her in a room and broadcast her crimes across the Empire. Every planet under Valdres's control would see it. Every race would see it. That was the purpose. Not justice but intimidation. On the third day, they brought her back to the throne room again. This time, it was packed. Every inch of space was filled with courtiers, officials and representatives of the ruled races. Cameras captured everything, broadcast to billions of people across the Empire. Elena was forced to kneel. At first she refused, but the guards continued to beat the backs of her knees, until they gave way. But she stood tall, her head held high. Cathara stood before the throne and pronounced the sentence. Elena Vasquez, you have been found guilty of espionage, sedition, and crimes against the Empire. The sentence is death, to be carried out immediately in Imperial Plaza. Let all onlookers know the price of defiance. They dragged her from the palace and into the plaza, a vast square paved with black stone. In the center was the execution platform. Thousands of Valdres citizens had gathered to watch. Numerous cameras were filming the scene from every angle. Elena was forced up the steps to the platform. Her hands were tied behind her back. The executioner was waiting, holding a traditional Valdres sword. It was an ancient ritual, meant to convey time-honored customs and the permanence of imperial power. She looked out over the crowd. Fear was written on many faces. Some representatives of the target species were crying. She saw one of the crashed ambassadors approaching, shouting something she couldn't hear. Guards held him back. A Valdres official stepped forward to read the official execution order. Elena ignored him, instead focusing her eyes on one of the cameras, knowing that this order would be broadcast across the galaxy and that humanity would be watching. There was a moment of silence as the official finished. Elena would have her chance to speak. It was tradition. She took a breath and spoke clearly, her voice echoing across the plaza. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am a human diplomat, and I come here for peace. I have broken no laws, committed no crimes. All I seek is equality and justice. She paused. Emperor Kethis, is there something you are trying to communicate by my death? Yes, but not the message you think it will. Kethis leaned forward, watching from the balcony above. You are showing the galaxy what the Valdres Empire is afraid of. Elena continued. Afraid of change, afraid of equality, afraid of losing power. You are showing everyone that your empire is built not on strength or wisdom, but on fear and carnage. There was a murmur of anger from the crowd on Valdres, but Elena continued. Humanity will never forget this. The galaxy will never forget this. You think you are showing strength, but in fact you are showing weakness. You have committed the greatest mistake in the history of the Empire. Enough, cried Zaxthris. Execute her now. The executioner stepped forward. Elena closed her eyes and thought of Earth, of her family, and of all humanity who would watch this broadcast. She hoped they would be wise and patient. She hoped they would remember that revenge and justice are two different things. The blade fell. Light years away in the headquarters of the Human Defense Fleet, Admiral James Cheng watched the broadcast. He was a burly man in his 60s with gray hair. His eyes were as if he had already seen countless wars. The officers stood in stunned silence. The broadcast went silent for a moment. No one moved. Then Chen's communications officer spoke in a trembling voice. Admiral, we have received an urgent transmission from Terra. The council has convened. We urgently need your advice, Admiral. Chen didn't reply right away. He stared at the screen where, moments before, Elena's face had appeared. He knew her. They had served together early in their careers when humanity was still finding its way in galactic politics. She was intelligent, compassionate, and committed to peace, and then they killed her. Sir, the communications officer said again. Chen looked to his senior staff. Their faces showed anger, sadness, and a desire for immediate retribution. Chen understood it. He felt it, but Elena's last words were right. They required thought, not just anger. Contact Earth, he said quietly. Tell the council I'll be there in 6 hours, and tell them to begin preparations for a long war. Not a war of ships and guns, but a war that will destroy the Empire. As he turned to leave his command center, one of his subordinates called out to him. What are you planning, sir? Chen stopped and turned around. We will do exactly what Elena would have wanted. We will dismantle the Valdres Empire piece by piece, and when we're done we will build something better in its place, something that will make her proud. The door closed behind him, and the Human Defense Fleet began preparations for the longest and most important operation in human history. It was a fight not just with weapons, but with ideas, alliances, and the pure belief that Elena Vasquez risked her life to defend, that all sentient beings deserved freedom. The emergency meeting of the Unification Council lasted. Representatives of every human nation gathered in Geneva, their faces projected onto screens surrounding the circular conference room. Admiral Chen stood at the central podium and announced his analysis of the situation. Valdres wants us to react emotionally. They executed Elena in order to provoke us into a military conflict they know they can win. Their fleet outnumbers ours 10-1. Direct war would have devastating consequences for humanity, he said. So you're not going to do anything? The African Union representative demanded, his voice shaking with uncontrollable rage. You're just condoning and accepting the killing of our diplomats. I'm not saying you're not going to do anything, Chen replied calmly. I said we're not going to give them the war they expect. We're giving them something completely different. A star map appeared on the screen behind him, showing the territory of the Valdres Empire in red. It was vast, spanning multiple galactic arms. But as Chen spoke, he began highlighting star systems in yellow. The Valdres Empire may appear powerful, but in reality it is fragile. It has conquered hundreds of races over millennia, but has never united them. They rule through fear and force, which means their empire relies on constant displays of power and the infrastructure to maintain control. Humanity's chief alien political strategist, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, stepped up next to Chen. She was tall with piercing eyes and tightly combed white hair. We'd spent the past decade analyzing the structure of this empire. Humans play a more important role in the economy and infrastructure than anyone realizes, including themselves. She pointed to another exhibit. There are 17,000 engineers, technicians, and specialists working in the Valdres sector. They maintain jump gates, run logistics software, repair communications networks, and provide technical support for systems that Valdres hasn't updated in centuries. They rely on us more than they realize. Are you saying we're going to withdraw our troops? The Asian coalition representative asked. An immediate withdrawal, Okano confirmed. But it won't be just a withdrawal. Before they withdraw, our troops will carry out a quiet withdrawal operation. There will be no illegal activity, no sabotage. We'll simply remove the patches, updates, and custom solutions we created to maintain the ancient Valdres system. It will return to its original state. Chen nodded. Valdres will find that 12,000-year-old technology won't work as well as they thought without constant human modification. Jump gates will become unreliable. Trade networks will slow down. Communications will become difficult. It won't be catastrophic immediately, but it will get worse over time. And while they deal with that problem, Okonkwo continued, cease all trade with the Valdres sector. No human goods, no human services, no human expertise. We will become a black hole in their economy. Other species will notice. They will see humanity walk away and wonder why they can't do it too. The council debated for hours. Some called for immediate military action despite the odds, while others worried that Chen's plan was not aggressive enough and would make humanity appear weak. But in the end, the vote was unanimous. A silent evacuation would begin immediately. Within 24 hours, every human in the Valdres sector had received the coded message. Most were as expected. Some were corporate employees, some were independent contractors, a few were researchers and teachers. All began preparing to evacuation. Marcus Webb was a senior engineer at Kelvar Jumpgate Station, one of the Empire's busiest transportation hubs. For 8 years he had worked there, maintaining the ancient gate technology that enabled faster-than-light travel. The Valdres operators rarely interfered with him, not understanding the system well enough to question his work. When Marcus received the coded message, he felt a knot in his stomach. He knew what had happened to Ambassador Vasquez. Everyone knew. Valdres was sure of. Now, humanity was responding, and he had a role to play. He had spent his last 3 days on the station working carefully. He hadn't removed any of Valdres's original systems, just the diagnostic software he had written, the efficiency algorithms he had implemented, and the error-checking routines that had caught problems before they became serious. He removed all of the improvements he had made over the past 8 years. The jump gates still worked, but they no longer worked as well as before. Travel times were longer and energy consumption increased. Small errors that the software had corrected automatically now required manual intervention. Valdres operators would need to truly understand their craft. On his final day, the commander of the Valdres base called him into his office. Commander Rector was old for Valdres. His skin was rough and pale. He wasn't particularly friendly, but he wasn't cruel either. He looked at Marcus with what could be interpreted as regret. "Are you leaving?" Rector said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Commander. All humanity is being recalled." "For execution," Marcus said, looking him in the eye. "Because His Majesty has murdered a diplomat under his diplomatic protection." "Yes." Rector was silent for a moment. "I disagreed with the decision." Many did not. "But the Emperor's word is well, His Majesty the Emperor will learn a harsh lesson in consequences," Marcus said. He turned to leave but paused for a moment and said, "Commander, allow me to advise you. The jump gate's main power regulator has a tendency to drift by 0.3% every 72 hours. It must be manually recalibrated. The procedure is outlined in Section 47, subsection 12 of the original technical manual. Good luck," he said, leaving before Rector could reply. 3 hours later he was on a transport bound for human space, with the 40 other humans who had been working on the station. Behind them, the jump gate's operational capacity began to drop from 98%. Small errors added up, and wait times grew longer. Across the Empire, the pattern repeated itself. 3 weeks after the start of Operation Quiet Exit, the Valdres Council gathered in a private chamber beneath the Imperial Palace. They requested a meeting with Emperor Sectress, who reluctantly agreed. Even his most trusted advisors questioned the matter. Grand Advisor Kelmore was the oldest of them all, nearly 2,000 years old. He stood before the Emperor and stated bluntly, "Your Majesty, the execution of a human diplomat has had unintended consequences." Kazlis dismissed the claim with a flick of his hand. "Humanity is having a temper tantrum. They will realize their weakness and rise up." "I don't think so, Your Majesty," Kelmore said. "Initial reports suggest this is a planned, coordinated action. All human workers in the territory have been evacuated. All trade with the human sphere has ceased, and systems across the Empire are beginning to fail." "Failure? What do you mean?" Corvos, another advisor, stepped forward with a data tablet. "The jump gates are becoming less efficient. Our communications networks are experiencing delays. Our logistics systems are experiencing errors. It's not catastrophic yet, but the trends are concerning. It appears the humans have been maintaining much of our infrastructure without our knowledge." Keith rose to his feet and raised his voice. "You say the Empire relied on humans? On a species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel? We did not, Your Majesty," Kelmore said carefully. "But they provided a service we took for granted. They were efficient and cost-effective. That's why we used them extensively. Now they are gone, and we find a gap in our capabilities, and we must fill that gap with our own," Kutra said. "We built this empire without humans. We can maintain it without them." "Of course, Your Majesty," Kelmore said. but his face bore less conviction than his word. The problem was compounded. Jump gates that had operated smoothly for decades now required constant maintenance. Once reliable trade routes became unpredictable. Ships that took 3 days to travel between systems now took 5 or 6 days. Logistics software that determined efficient routes was lost, and goods began piling up in distribution centers. Valdres quickly began training its own people to fill the gap. But it wasn't easy. The technology was ancient, developed by a civilization long since absorbed into the Empire. Many of the original documents had been lost. For millennia, Valdres had maintained its system through tradition and repetition, not understanding. It was the humans who truly understood how things worked. Meanwhile, other species in the Empire were beginning to take notice. If the humans could escape, why couldn't they? Whispers of rebellion began to spread across controlled worlds. On the mining world of Kreshvar, insectoid grinders halted all shipments of ore to the Valdres smelt. They claimed an equipment malfunction, but intelligence reports suggested this was a deliberate slowdown. As Valdres's overseers threatened punishment, the crash reveals that the human technicians who once maintained the equipment are gone, and things will be at a standstill until Valdres can send in replacement. On the water planet Luminetal, the Luminina race, a free-floating race of creatures that produce rare pharmaceuticals, begin demanding better terms of trade. They had always been peaceful, never confrontational, but now they had seen the humans defy the Empire and survive. It had made them braver. Even on the planet of Valdres, there was unrest. Not everyone on Valdres supported the Empire's brutal ways. The younger generation, in particular, had worked alongside humans and other species. They had friends and colleagues among those under their rule. The Emperor's arrogance in executing Elena Vasquez shocked many. Admiral Chen watched the reports coming in from the far reaches of the Valdres sector, and smiled slightly. It had worked. The Empire had not fallen. Not yet, but it was weakening. The question was how long it would take Cass to realize he had made a grave error. Back on Earth, Chen met with his senior officers in a fortified conference room. Captain Marcus Rivera, commander of the Human Special Forces, laid out on the table a holographic display showing military installations, trade routes and political centers throughout the Empire. "We are moving on to the next phase," Chen said. "Valdres is destabilized, but they are not defeated yet. We need to offer them something better than what they have." "The Solaris Conference," said Commander Lisa Xiao, Chen's strategic operations officer. "We've sent out invitations to representatives of all species in the Valdres sector, not just subordinate species but independent star systems as well. Anyone who seeks an alternative to Valdres rule." "How many applicants do we have?" Chen asked. "So far, 73 species have committed to sending delegations, and another 50 are considering doing so. This is more than we could have hoped for." Rivera leaned forward. "Valdres will not let this go without a fight. If they find out about our actions, they will retaliate militarily." "I know that," Chen said, "and that's why we need to be prepared. We can't confront their fleet directly, but we don't need to. We just need to survive until the alliance is formed. If 100 races come together, the calculations will change." Zhao asked what we would do if Valdres attacked before the alliance was formed. Chen was silent for a moment. "We would fight then. I hoped Elena's sacrifice would not be in vain." A message was sent over secure lines to friendly species. "Humanity invites you to the Solaris Congress. Join forces to build a better galaxy. A galaxy based on cooperation, not domination. A galaxy where no species bows to another." In the Imperial Palace on Valdres Prime, Emperor Casulis finally understood what was happening. His advisors had been warning him for weeks, but he had ignored their concerns. Now, having read the intelligence reports on the Solaris Conference, he understood that humanity wasn't just rebelling against him. They were trying to oust him. He called his warlords into his throne room. Grand Admiral Chorus, commander of the Valdres fleet, stood erect before Keith. He was a career soldier, scarred by countless campaigns, loyal to the Empire above all else. Grand Admiral Zeuslis said coldly, "I want you to assemble a great fleet. A fleet of 5,000 ships, the largest we have ever fielded." "Your Majesty," Chorus said, "may I speak to our human targets?" Keith asked. "They challenge us. They think they can forge an alliance against us. We will show them what happens to those who defy the Imperium. We will burn their worlds to the ground and scatter the survivors as slaves across the galaxy. They will serve as an example to ensure that no other species dares resist us again." Korath bowed his head. "Your Majesty, it will be fulfilled." As he turned to leave to begin assembling his fleet, Grand Advisor Kelmore approached the throne. "Your Majesty, is this wise?" Sending so many ships into an attack on humanity will make our own territory vulnerable. It will calm the fears of our subject species if they know what we will do to them. Kasulis interjected. Fear is the foundation of order. We have become too lenient, too tolerant. It is time to teach the galaxy why we have ruled for Kelmore bowed his head and said no more, but his aged eyes held a worried look. He had served 7 emperors in his long life. He had seen empires rise and fall, seen seemingly unshakable dynasties destroyed by hubris and arrogance, and he wondered if he was watching the same thing happen again. The fleet began to gather in orbit around Valdras Prime. 5,000 ships, from massive dreadnoughts to fast attack cruisers, were assembled in a terrifying show of force. Enough firepower to destroy 100 planets. Crews were drafted from reserve. Supplies were loaded, battle plans were made, and at Solaris Reach, a human outpost across the galaxy, representatives of 73 species gathered for a conference that would change everything. They came from water worlds and desert planets, from high-gravity forges and zero-gravity settlement. They were insectoid and reptilian, crystalline and gaseous, humanoid and utterly alien, but they all shared a common hope that there might be a galaxy they didn't need to fear. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of Solaris Reach, watching for ships coming from the far reaches of known space. Next to him, Dr. Okonkwo was checking the schedule for the tournament. This will work, she said quietly. It will work. Chen didn't answer right away. He thought of Elena, her final words on the execution platform. She knew she was going to die, but she had used her final moments to sow seeds of doubt among the people of the Empire, to show them that rebellion was possible. It will work, he said finally. If it didn't, everything she had risked her life to build would be for nothing. More ships appeared on the horizon. The coalition was forming, and somewhere in the darkness, the great armada of the Valdras Empire was coming to destroy them all. Solaris Reach's main assembly hall was designed to accommodate the physical needs of dozens of different species. Atmospheric conditioning units could create different environmental zones. Gravity plates could be adjusted to accommodate various body types. Translation systems worked in real time, translating hundreds of languages simultaneously. It was a marvel of comprehensive engineering, constructed in less than 3 months by human and allied workers, hell-bent on making this conference a success. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo stood at the central podium, surveying the assembled delegates. Some sat in traditional chairs, others floated in specialist spaces, and still others existed as energy patterns within containment vessels. The weight of this most diverse conference in the history of the galaxy weighed heavily on her shoulders. Thank you all for coming, she began, her words instantly translated into all the languages present. 3 weeks ago, the Valdras Empire executed Ambassador Elena Vasquez for her crusade for equality. She had been murdered for suggesting that all sentient species should have a say in the governance of the galaxy. She paused, trying to understand what he meant. We are gathered here not for revenge, but to build something better. For 12,000 years, the Valdras Empire has ruled through fear. We propose to form a coalition based on the simple principles of cooperation, mutual respect, and that no race should bow to another. A representative from the crash, his body glittering under the light, raised his manipulator's limbs. Okonkwo recognized him as Ambassador Tekla, one of the first to respond to the invitation. The Valdras would never forgive this. They would come with their fleets and destroy us. They would try, Okonkwo admitted.
That is why this union must be more than just words. We need a mutual defense pact, common military protocols, and a combined fleet. We must stand together or perish individually. The Almina representative spoke in an anxious voice, his radiant form pulsating with vibrant colors. Humanity has only been in space for 2 centuries. The Valdras have conquered civilizations older than your entire recorded history. Why should we believe you can lead us against them? It was a fair question. Admiral Chen stood and walked over to Okonkwo's podium. We are not asking you to lead us, he said. We want to stand with you. Humanity's superiority is not in our age or technology. That's our perspective. We're new to the galaxy, and we haven't forgotten what it means to be the underdog. We haven't forgotten how to adapt, innovate, and find solutions where others have given up. He brought up a holographic display showing military formations. Valdras fights the way they've been fought for millennia. Huge ships, overwhelming firepower, and straightforward tactics. They win through superior numbers and the fear they instill. But we've studied their methods and discovered their weaknesses. Standing in the back, Captain Marcus Rivera offers his own insight. I've trained with special forces from 12. You each have your own unique abilities and approach to combat. The Valdras have never faced a truly coordinated multi-race defense. They have always fought and conquered their enemies individually. We offer something they have never experienced before,
Combined weapons tactics, with races that complement each other's strengths. Delegates debated and negotiated for 6 days. It was complicated and chaotic. Tribes with ancient grudges had to find common ground. Cultures with vastly different values had to agree on basic principles. There were moments when it seemed like everything was falling apart, but slowly a framework began to take shape. It was called the Charter of the United Free System, and its core principles were simple. All species would be given equal representation. Decisions would require consensus, not domination. Military resources would be committed, but controlled by a rotating unified command. And no species would be forced to act against its own interest. Most importantly, any species could leave the Confederacy at any time. This was the opposite of everything the Valdres Empire stood for. By the 7th day, 73 species had signed the charter. More were expected to join in the coming weeks. The Confederacy of Free Systems officially existed. Admiral Chen knew he probably only had about 2 weeks before Valdres would strike back. He spent weeks working with the military commanders of the allied species, developing joint strategies and training them for joint operations. At first it was chaos. Each species had its own military traditions, its own chain of command, and its own way of thinking about war. But the humans were adept at assembling teams from diverse groups. They had been doing this on Earth for millennia, long before they reached space. Chen applied those lessons to the present, finding ways to make different approaches work together rather than at odds with each other. Kresh excelled in defensive warfare. Their collective consciousness allowed them to work together in ways that individual combatants could not. Chen assigned them to defend key facilities and supply lines. Lumina could manipulate electromagnetic fields to jam sensors and communications. Chen integrated them into each fleet as electronic warfare specialists. The crystal shards were able to survive in environments that would have wiped out most other species, and they were able to use their own bodies to repair damaged ships. Chen trained them to be experts in damage control. One after another, each species found a role in the Allied forces that played to their strengths. Humanity had become the connective tissue of humanity, communicating with everyone, coordinating between different groups, and adapting tactics on the fly. It wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings and conflicts, but it was slowly coming together. Then scouts reported that a large fleet was leaving the Valdres sector and heading toward Proxima Reach, the closest star system to Solaris Reach. 5,000 Valdres warships, the largest fleet in history. They were to arrive in 4 days. This news caused panic among the Allied forces. Some species sought to immediately withdraw from Solaris Reach. Others sought to spread out, reducing the Allied attack surface. Only a few believed they could actually fight. Chen called an emergency meeting at Allied command. Representatives of the 30 species crowded into the operations room, their respective images and holograms filling the air. "We have 4 days left," Chen said without preamble. "Valdres will bring everything he has to bear. If we flee, the coalition will be wiped out before it can even begin to act. Every species will think our plan is mere lip service, with no substance to it. Valdres will hunt us down individually, and everything we've built here will be for naught. So what are we going to do?" asked the Crash Defense Force sector commander. "Our species as a whole has about 800 ships, while they have 5,000. The math is simple. We're going to fight them the same way," Chen said. He brought up a tactical display. "We're not going to fight them head-on. We will utilize the asteroid fields of Proxima Reach, the gravity wells of the gas giants, and all other environmental factors. We will make them fight on our terms, not theirs." Captain Rivera added, "The Valdres are arrogant. They think they are hunting a weak and scattered enemy. They don't know that we are forming a true coalition. They don't know that we've been training together. When we arrive at Proxima Reach, we expect to see a few human ships, and perhaps some desperate allies, but we intend to present them with a unified defense." Allied commanders have studied the tactical plan. It's risky, possibly suicidal. But Chen was right about one thing. If they fled now, it would be the end of the Allied forces. They needed to position their forces in advance. Admiral Velcro of the Lightstar Fleet had said. Her shining figure was filled with determination. "If we want to take advantage of this situation, we need to be in position before they arrive." Chen agreed. "We have 4 days to trap Proxima Reach. Let's get to work." The combined fleet has moved into the Proxima Reach system and begun preparations. Human ships are positioned near the system's main planet, making them obvious targets. Valdres will find them and consider them his main force. But throughout the asteroid belt, behind the gas giants and hidden in the shadows of the solar moons,
Dozens of combined fleets lay in wait. Impact defense platforms were strapped to asteroids. Luminous ships were positioned to jam sensors. And Shardfolk engineering teams stood ready to collapse damaged sections of the asteroid belt on command. This was the largest joint operation they had ever attempted, and they had 4 days to carry it out. On the 4th day, the fleet arrived. Grand Admiral Chorus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the fleet emerge from its faster-than-light voyage. 5,000 ships, deployed in perfect formation. It was a show of power that would have forced any foe to surrender immediately. Scan for enemy vessels, he ordered. Multiple communications confirmed. The sensor officer reported, "We've detected approximately 50 vessels in orbit around the 4th planet. Appears to be human ships and associated support craft." Chorus couldn't help but smile. Only 50 ships. Intelligence reports indicated that many more species had joined the coalition. Perhaps the other species had fled upon learning of our approach, the lieutenant said. Sensing them, Chorus ordered, "Commence standard battle formation. All ships advance. We will quickly overwhelm them and advance toward Solaris Reach." The fleet began its advance. 5,000 ships launched a coordinated wave attack. It was the culmination of millennia of military tradition, and its precision was beautiful. Valdres had mastered the art of overwhelming force. Aboard the human flagship, the Unity, Admiral Chen watched the Valdres fleet approach. Beside him, representatives of a dozen races monitored various aspects of the battle. The time had come. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Unified Stand. Show us what we're made of." The combined fleet has begun operations throughout the Proxima Reach system. Ships appearing throughout the system. Suddenly the number of visible vessels has grown from 50 to 800. Valdres has fallen into a trap. Enemy contact is increasing. A sensor officer from the Eternal Dominion reported in alarm. They were detecting approaching ships throughout the system. Hundreds, lurking everywhere, in the asteroid belts behind the gas giants. Chorus felt a flash of anxiety, but stifled it. "Nothing has changed. We are still outnumbered 6 to 1. All ships engaged." However, the Allied battle did not unfold as Valdres had expected. Human ships flowed in and out, never staying in one place long enough for Valdres's heavy artillery to lock on. Collision protection platforms had turned parts of the asteroid belt into dangerous battlefields, and Valdres's ships were under fire from all sides. Luminous ships scrambled sensors and communications, disrupting the Valdres's communications. The Valdres cruisers pursued a group of human frigates into the gas giant's upper atmosphere, attempting to destroy them. However, they were caught in an unexpected gravity well, and the atmospheric drag caused their formation to break apart. Allied ships, hidden in the lower atmosphere, rose to the surface and caught them from below. "This is strange," Chorus said, watching his tactical deployment.
The battle was not going as planned. His ships were being ambushed and constantly forced to fight from disadvantageous positions. The enemy was more coordinated than he had ever seen them before. How can they communicate so efficiently? Surely our jamming could disrupt it. He didn't know that the Shardfolk communications experts were using a crystalline resonance that Valdres couldn't jam, or that the Allied forces had developed a backup communication system that integrated human tactical protocols with the Crash Hivemind relay network. The battle lasted for 18 hours. Valdres continued to try to overwhelm the Allied forces with his numerical superiority, but every time he launched an attack he was outmaneuvered. The Allied forces, like water flowing around Valdres's forces, attacked his weak spots and never gave him a solid target. Chorus finally knew he was defeated, but that doesn't mean he was defeated. The fleet still had superior firepower, but that didn't mean they couldn't win. Any advantage they might have had was being negated by tactics and coordination he had no experience with. He gave the order, "All fleet, regroup." But regrouping under fire with an enemy in control of the battlefield was harder than advancing. The Allied forces launched a fierce attack on the Valdres fleet as it attempted to combine forces. Long-range weapons fired from the crashed platforms kept the fleet off balance, and Luminina's jamming fields made coordination difficult. By the time the fleet managed to retreat to its defensive positions, it had lost nearly 800 ships, though not all were destroyed. Many ships were disabled and their crews evacuated before being taken over by Allied salvage teams. This was a deliberate policy. Chen had ordered his forces to disable rather than destroy whenever possible. He wanted the crew of the Valdres to return home and tell their people what had happened. From his flagship, Chorus surveyed his losses and felt something he had never experienced in his 50 years of military service. Doubt. Not just doubt about tactics or strategy, but doubt about the fundamental assumptions of Valdres military doctrine. "Send a message to Valdres Prime," he said quietly.
Tell Emperor Circe that the enemy has been engaged in Proxima Reach. Tell them that humanity has formed a true union, not just an alliance of convenience. Tell them they need to rethink their strategy. As the message was sent, Chen received reports from the entire combined fleet. They had suffered losses too. Nearly 150 ships had been destroyed or disabled, but they held on. They had faced a massive fleet, and not only survived but forced it to retreat. More importantly, they proved that the coalition existed, that different species could work together effectively, and that they could resist Valdras. Send a message to all members of the coalition, Chen said. Tell them we have won. Tell them this is only the beginning, and send a general broadcast to star systems throughout the galaxy. Let them know that the coalition of free systems still exists, and that anyone who wishes to join is welcome. Within days, dozens more races sent representatives to Solaris Reach. The coalition had proven itself in battle, and that changed everything. The races who had feared resistance to Valdras now saw a realistic option. In the Imperial Palace on Valdras Prime, Emperor Circe read Chorus's report, and felt a surge of rage. The fleet was defeated, not completely destroyed, but outnumbered and forced to retreat. It was unthinkable. But Grand Advisor Kelmore, reading the same report, felt something different. He felt fear, for he understood something Circe clearly did not. The Battle of Proxima Reach was more than just a military defeat. It opened a crack in the very foundation of the Empire. If the races could unite against the Valdras, it would mean the end of 12,000 years of dominance. The defeat at Proxima Reach sent shockwaves through the Valdras. Within 2 weeks, 3 major sectors declared their independence. The governors of these regions watched closely to see if this alliance was genuine or just another failed rebellion, and this battle answered that question. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, Governor Kernak had ruled for 400 years. He had always been loyal to the Empire, but he was also pragmatic. As Confederate broadcasts reached his planet, showing footage of the retreating fleet, he called a meeting of his sector's military commander. The Empire was weakening, he told them bluntly. The Confederacy had given us a choice: continue to serve masters who saw us as nothing more than tools, or join an alliance of equals. I knew which future I would choose. Within days, Forge Prime and 17 other industrial worlds in the sector declared independence and petitioned to join the Confederacy. They brought with them manufacturing capacity, shipyards, and skilled labor. The Confederacy's industrial base tripled overnight. On Valdras Prime, Emperor Circe watched his empire crumble and became painfully aware of his slipping control. He called an emergency council, demanded explanations, and ordered an investigation into betrayal and conspiracy. But the truth was simpler and more devastating than any conspiracy. His subjects were no longer afraid. We must act decisively, he told his advisors. Show them that rebellion means death. Grand Advisor Kelmore, already elderly even by Valdras's standards, spoke carefully. Your Majesty, we have already used force. The execution of human diplomats led to this crisis. The military action in Proxima Reach has failed to stop the coalition. Perhaps it is time to consider negotiations. Negotiations? Saxulus's voice was dangerous. Are you suggesting we negotiate with those who oppose us? Your Majesty, we must face reality. The Empire cannot fight every race at once. Our economy is collapsing, our logistics networks are crippled, and our subject races are rebelling. We must find a way to protect what remains. Keith rose from his throne and looked down at his advisor. Kelmore, you are old. An old, weak empire. The Empire never negotiates with an inferior force. Humanity itself must crush this rebellion first. Destroy Earth and the coalition will fall apart. Kelmore bowed his head and said nothing more, but deep down he knew the Empire was doomed. Circe was fighting its final war. He was using tactics that had worked for 12,000 years, but they were powerless against an enemy that had changed the rules. The Emperor ordered a new offensive. Grand Admiral Chorus, still recovering from the defeat at Proxima Reach, rallied the remains of his great fleet and launched an offensive against the combined star systems. However, he encountered organized resistance at every turn. The combined forces had learned their lesson from the first battle. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and strategic retreats. They forced Valdras to sacrifice every system, bleeding him with every victory. Meanwhile, the Allied forces continued to grow in number. 100 species joined, then each contributed ships, resources, and expertise. The balance of power was shifting. Admiral Chen knew that military victory alone would not end the war. The Valdras had to be completely defeated, both militarily and morally. That meant taking the battle to the Valdras mainland. The battle had to end before more lives were lost. He told the United Council in secret meeting. The Valdrus will fight as long as they believe they can win. We must make it clear to them that they cannot win. Dr. Okonkwo agreed. But we can't just destroy Valdrus Prime. That would make us just as bad as they are. We need a better offer. Commander Velcro of Luminina has proposed regime change. Remove Emperor Sulus and his hardliners and establish a government willing to negotiate. But that's not all, Chen. We needed to show the people of Valdrus that the Empire had abandoned them, not that we had conquered them. This was their choice as much as ours. So we came up with a plan, an ambitious and risky one. The combined fleet would march on Valdrus Prime, but rather than bombard it, we would communicate directly with the people of Valdrus. Show them evidence of the crimes their rulers have committed, not just against other races, but against their own people. Give them a choice: continue to follow the failed empire, or join the coalition on equal footing. What if they choose to continue fighting? Captain Rivera asked. Then we'll do what we have to, Chen said sternly. But I don't think that will happen. I've studied the Valdrus. They're not evil, just brainwashed. Given a real choice, they would surely surprise us. 6 months after the Battle of Proxima Reach, the combined fleet assembled for a final offensive. It was now immense. Over 150 species, and 2,000 ships. Not the fleet it was at its height, but more diverse, more adaptable, and more cohesive. They entered the Valdrus home system, and found a defensive fleet waiting for them, 3,000 ships surrounding the planet. The last major concentration of Valdrus military power, Grand Admiral Chorus personally commanded, determined to defend his homeworld. The two fleets faced each other across the darkness of space. For a long time, neither side made a move. Admiral Chen then opened a broadcast channel, one that reached not only the Valdrus fleet, but all communications devices on the surface. The admiral said, "People of Valdrus, I am Admiral James Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. I speak on behalf of the Coalition of Free Systems. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to give you a choice." On the surface planets, billions of Valdrusians watched and listened. Many of them had never heard a human voice before. They had only known humanity through propaganda.
6 months ago, the Emperor ordered the execution of Ambassador Elena Vasquez, a diplomat who had come peacefully seeking equality under galactic law. This execution was murder, and it was the beginning of all that followed. Chen paused, trying to understand the meaning of the words deeply. But this was not revenge. This is about the future. For 12,000 years, your empire has ruled through fear. It has conquered hundreds of species, enslaved billions, and committed atrocities that most of you will never know about. We have the evidence, and we will show it to you. Over the next hour, the Allied forces will broadcast evidence of the Empire's crimes, not propaganda, not exaggeration, but actual records from the Empire's own archives, orders for mass executions, plans for genocide against species that resisted too strongly, economic policies that deliberately impoverished targeted species, evidence of the corruption of the ruling class, evidence of wealth amassed while the people of Valdrus suffered. Most damning were recordings of the Emperor, Zeusless, and his entourage despising their own people, viewing them as tools to be exploited, and claiming that their loyalty was not earned through good governance but through fear. In the capital, Kurlas, crowds began to gather in the streets. The government tried to shut down the broadcasts, but the Confederacy had hacked every system, every display, every communications network. The truth came flooding out. From the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Chorus watched his tactical display, his heart breaking, not because of the enemy fleet before him, but because of the events unfolding on the planet below. They could see the protests beginning and heard reports of unrest spreading across the cities. "Admiral," the communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving messages from other ships in the fleet. Some captains are asking if the broadcasts are true. Others are saying that if His Majesty the Emperor is acting like this, they won't fight to protect him." He rolled his eyes. He had served the Empire his whole life, believing in its mission and justice. Now, watching the Empire crumble from within, he could not point out the mistakes of the Allied forces. Admiral Chen sent another message, this time directly to the Valdrus military. "Commanders of the Valdrus Defense Fleet, we know that many of you are noble warriors who believe you are serving for justice. I know you followed orders, did your duty, and I respect that. But now you know the truth about who you served." Chen's voice was calm, not triumphant. "We offer you this. Step aside. Let's land peacefully on Valdrus Prime and build something better. Not a human empire to replace Valdrus's empire, but a true union in which the Valdrus have an equal say with other races. A place where people could thrive through cooperation, not conquest. A place where people would not die defending a tyrant's throne." In the imperial palace, Emperor Kasulis,
watched the broadcast with growing rage. Lies, he shouted to all who would listen. Every lie is designed to crush our spirit. We are Valdres. We have reigned for 12,000 years. We will not bow to these upstarts. But Grand Advisor Kel Muir saw the Emperor and saw a desperate, terrified old man clinging to power that was already gone. Your Majesty, he said quietly, it is over. We have lost. Never. Cass drew his ceremonial sword from the throne. I will die before I succumb to them. You will all die before that. The doors to the throne room slammed open. They were not the enemy, but the Valdres Imperial Guard, the Emperor's personal guards. Their commander, Captain Veras, stepped forward with his weapon drawn, but without aiming. His Majesty Virtus said, we have served your Majesty loyally for decades, but we will not die for a lie. We will not allow your people to suffer for your Majesty's pride. You are under arrest. Keith stared in disbelief. How dare you do that? You swore to protect the people of Valdres, Virtus warned, refusing to aid the tyrant. Your reign is over. In orbit, Grand Admiral Chorus received word that the Emperor had been arrested by his own guard. Seeing the fleet and the combined forces opposing them, Grand Admiral Chorus made the most difficult decision of his life. He opened a line of communication with Admiral Chen. Admiral, this is Grand Admiral Chorus of the Valdres Defense Fleet. We are withdrawn. His Majesty the Emperor is being held captive. I demand terms for a peaceful transfer of power. Chen felt a surge of relief in his heart. This is what he wanted, and what Elena would have wanted as well. Thank you for your wisdom, Grand Admiral. The combined forces will now land peacefully on Valdres Prime. I propose the establishment of a joint security force to maintain order during the transition. Would you cooperate in this matter? There was a brief pause, then I answered, yes, Admiral. Captain Marcus Rivera and his troops were assigned to guard the Imperial Palace. They acted quickly and carefully, taking care not to provoke any resistance. When they reached the throne room, they found Emperor Kateris chained to the guards. The Emperor looked at Rivera with hatred. Do you humans think you have won? Do you think you can rule where we failed? You will destroy yourself within a generation. Rivera walked up to the throne and looked at the ancient ruler of Valdres. Your Majesty, we are not here to rule. We are here to make sure no one rules like you. That is the difference. Keith was taken into custody to stand trial in the United Court of Justice. Charges included murder, crimes against sentient species, genocide, and corruption. The trial would be fair, with a judge from Valdres presiding. Justice would be served, not vengeance. Reactions from the people of the city of Curvres were mixed. Some in Valdres protested the arrival of the Allied forces, seeing it as an occupation. Others welcomed it, tired of the Empire's endless wars and oppression. Many were simply confused, unsure of what this new future would hold. 3 days after the Emperor's arrest, Admiral Cheng landed on Valdres Prime. He arrived not by military shuttle, but by diplomatic transport. Dr. Okonkwo and representatives of the 12 tribes accompanied him. He was greeted on the landing pad by Grand Advisor Kelmore. Despite his advanced age, Kelmore had agreed to serve as interim leader until formal elections could be held. Admiral Chen, Kelmore said, with a slight bow, welcome to Valdres Prime. I wish the circumstances for my first visit were different. I wanted to visit as a colleague, not as Ambassador Vasquez as Avenger, Chen said, but we have to face the reality before us, not the reality we wish we had. The two walked through the palace, past the ancient halls that had overseen 12,000 years of imperial rule. As they walked, Kelmore said quietly, Admiral, I have served this empire all my life. Nearly 2,000 years. I believed I was bringing order to the galaxy, civilization to barbaric races. But now I realize we have become barbarians, corrupted by power, unable to distinguish between strength and tyranny. What's important is that you see it now, Chen said, and that together we can build something better. They arrived at the throne room, where Emperor Kasulis had ordered Elena's execution broadcast to the galaxy, where representatives from the coalition and the Valdres Society had gathered. Military personnel, civilian leaders, and cultural representatives gathered to discuss the future. Okonkwo stood before them and outlined his plan. The Galactic Federation would replace the Valdres Empire and the Confederacy of Free Systems. There would be a rotating council of representatives from the member species. There would be no permanent emperor or ruling authority. A decision requires consensus. Any species can secede at any time, but hopefully no one will. So what about us? The Valdres senator asked. What about the people of Valdres? Will we be punished for the Empire's crimes? Criminals will be punished, Chen said firmly. Those who issued criminal orders, committed atrocities, abused their power. They will be brought to justice. but the entire Valdras people will not be held responsible for the crimes of their leader. You will become full members of the Federation, with all the rights and responsibilities that come with it. Why? Another Valdras asked. We executed your diplomats. We tried to destroy you. Why show mercy? Chen remembered Elena's final words on the execution platform. Judging an entire race by its worst leader would be the same mistake the Empire made. This cycle of revenge and hatred must end somewhere, and I believe that, given a true choice, the people of Valdras would choose to build, not conquer. Silence fell upon the throne room. Then, slowly, the representatives of Valdras began to nod. Not all, not most, but enough. It was a start. The throne itself was dismantled that day, its metal and aggregates recorded as historical artifacts. In its place would be erected a memorial to all victims of imperial tyranny, including Elena Vasquez. The throne room would become a museum, a reminder of what happens when one species decides it has the right to rule over all other. Foreign coalition fleets began landing on Valdras Prime, not as conquerors but as partners. Human engineers worked alongside Valdras technicians to repair infrastructure. Emergency personnel at the crash site treated injured civilians of all species. Luminian educators began teaching the principles of the coalition in schools, but it wasn't perfect. There were incidents, protests, and acts of violence. 12,000 years of imperial conditioning didn't disappear overnight, but slowly and reluctantly, change began to occur.
And in a quiet ceremony attended by representatives of all the allied races, a statue of Elena Vasquez was unveiled in what was once Imperial Plaza. The inscription read, "She gave her life so that billions of people could live in freedom." Admiral Chen stood before the statue and felt tears well up in his eyes. "We did it, Elena," he whispered, "not the way you would have hoped, but we did it. The Empire is gone and we are building something you will be proud of." The First Galactic Congress convened 1 year after the fall of Emperor Kethis. The location was symbolic, not Valdras Prime or Earth, but Solaris Reach, the station where the Confederacy was first formed, which had been greatly expanded and was now large enough to accommodate representatives from all 23 species, all major planets that had joined the Federation. The assembly room was a masterpiece of inclusive design. Environmental controls maintained hundreds of different atmospheric conditions simultaneously, and gravity plates adjusted to accommodate a variety of life forms, from tiny insect-like creatures to gigantic rock-like creatures. A real-time translation system for speech, light, chemical signals and quantum entanglement was used for communication. Rather than a throne, a circular platform stood in the center of the room. This symbolism was intentional. No species was superior to another. Everyone stood equally inward-facing. Now retired, Admiral James Cheng, the first Human Federation representative, took to the stage to deliver the opening remarks. "A year ago," he began, "the Valdras Empire executed Ambassador Elena Vasquez for her demands for equality. Today we gather in her memory, as equals, not to celebrate the fall of an empire but what we built from its ashes." He looked around the chamber, surveying the assembled delegate. Valdras sat next to the human, crashed next to Lumina, former enemies now allies. The founding principles of the Federation are simple. No species shall kneel before another, neither in servitude, nor in fear, nor in subjugated submission. We will disagree, and we will debate, and we will sometimes be bitterly annoyed with one another, but we will do so on equal footing. The first order of business for the assembly was the establishment of a rotating council. Unlike the Valdras Empire's permanent emperor, the Federation Council would elect representatives from the 12 species for 2-year terms, with the position rotating to ensure all member species had an opportunity to participate. The selection process was contentious. Many species argued that humans, having led the rebellion, deserved special status and called for humans to be permanently elected to the council. Chen strongly opposed this. "If we were to gain permanent power, we would become the same enemies we once fought," he said. "The empire has lasted for 12,000 years because it concentrated power in the hands of one species. We must not make the same mistake again. Humanity has completed its term on the council and will step down like everyone else." Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, currently the Federation's first Minister of International Cooperation, supported Chen's position. "The test of whether we truly believe in equality is whether we are willing to give up power." Valdras never understood that. The assembly voted, and a rotating council was established. Humanity, along with Valdras, Crush, Lumina, and the other 8 major races, were given one of the 12 seats for the first term. People were already calling it the most representative government the galaxy had ever seen.
But the Federation faced great challenges, the most pressing of which was what to do about the Valdras himself. Emperor Suctrus was awaiting trial in a secure facility, but he was only one man. Millions of Valdras had served the Empire in one capacity or another. How many people were guilty, how many deserved punishment? The Federation established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, modeled on historical precedents on Earth and other planets. Its principles were simple. Those who came forward, admitted their guilt and showed sincere remorse would be given reduced sentences or pardons. Those who denied responsibility or failed to show remorse faced severe prosecution. Grand Admiral Chorus was one of the first to appear before the commission. He stood not in a courtroom but in a simple hearing room, facing a panel of judges made up of 6 different species, including 2 Valdra. He stated unequivocally that he bore responsibility for the military operation that had resulted in the deaths of thousands. I followed the Emperor's orders, but I now understand that merely following orders is no excuse. I believed I was working for a greater good, but I was. The chief judge, an elderly man named Takfor, studied him carefully. Do you regret your actions, Grand Admiral? Chorus said quietly. Every day I look at the faces of those who died under my command, and I will continue to do so until the day I die. I cannot undo my actions, but I can work to build a better future. After 3 days of testimony, the commission sentenced Chorus to 5 years of community service. Tasked with working with the Federation military and training a new generation in tactics and strategy, he accepted without complaint. Emperor Keith, meanwhile, showed no remorse. His trial lasted 3 months, and was broadcast across the Federation. The evidence against him was overwhelming: direct orders for genocide, the execution of innocent people, systematic oppression, corruption, and countless other crimes. Captain Marcus Rivera, who had captured the Emperor, took the stand. He testified that Chris had appeared defiant and unrepentant in the throne room. He told me that we would destroy ourselves within a generation, and Captain Rivera said that we could not control the areas where he had failed. But he didn't understand. We are not trying to control, we are trying to allow all species to control themselves. The tribunal found Kateris guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, to be served in a facility on a neutral planet, with regular visits from representatives of the victim species. He was not executed, as the Federation's charter abolished the death penalty. Even someone like Kateris was entitled to basic human rights. As the verdict was read, Kasoris chuckled. Do you think this makes you superior to us? Do you think mercy is power? You have 50 years before your precious Commonwealth destroys itself. The presiding judge, a woman named Judge Maria Santos, looked at him coldly. Perhaps it would. No government lasts forever. But if the empire falls, it will be through our own failures, not through our conquest of others. That is the difference between us and you. While the legal process continued, the real work of building a republic was underway across the galaxy. The challenges were immense. The economy of the Valdras Empire was based on exploitation and tribute. Now that system was gone, something new had to take its place. Dr. Okonkwo led the creation of a Federation trade network based on fair exchange, not coercion. Species that had been forced to provide resources for free were now able to negotiate prices. Technologically backward worlds were given access to advanced equipment and training. The economic disruption was immense. Some races that had benefited from the Empire's preferential treatment struggled to adapt. The world of Valdras, which had previously subsisted on tribute from conquered peoples, now faced the need for true economic development. There were times of unemployment, inflation, and hardship, but there was also opportunity. Once oppressed races were now able to innovate and trade freely. Forced to focus on mining for the Empire, Crest discovered his natural talent for biochemistry and began developing groundbreaking medicine. Luminina, limited to energy production under Imperial rule, began creating artwork that incorporated her ability to manipulate light, sparking a cultural renaissance. Humanity's role evolved from military leadership to something else. We became known as mediators, connectors, a species able to understand different perspectives and find common ground. This was not surprising, as humanity was divided into thousands of cultures and languages on Earth alone, and even within these there was great diversity. They had experience managing diversity. Chung was constantly traveling between worlds, resolving conflicts and facilitating negotiations. Trade disputes between the shards and the newly independent mining consortium. Cultural misunderstandings between races, with very different concepts of family. Border disputes inherited from the Empire's arbitrary division of territory. I never thought retirement would be more exhausting than war, he joked with Rivera, who was visiting Earth for the first time. Leah, commander of the Federation's Joint Defense Forces, laughed. At least hardly anyone's shooting at us anymore. Conflicts are still ongoing. Some species are taking advantage of the Federation's newness to settle old scores. Pirates and warlords thrived in areas blocked by Imperial rule. The federal military, far smaller than the great fleets of the past, struggled to maintain order over such a vast area. However, the principle of resolving disputes through negotiation whenever possible remained unchanged. The use of force is only a last resort, and always through joint Federation operations, with no single species acting alone. 5 years after the founding of the Federation, a new generation was coming of age across the galaxy. Children raised not under Imperial rule, but in a system where different species could learn, work and live together. A student from Valdras, named Kelsara, was standing in a classroom on Earth, participating in an exchange program.
She was one of the first of her species to enroll in the Human Diplomacy Academy, where she studied rigorous subjects such as interspecies political relations, conflict resolution, and Federation law. Her classmates were from over a dozen different species, all studying to become Federation diplomats. They worked on simulations together, debated policies, and learned each other's languages and customs. One day, their instructor took them to the Elena Vasquez Memorial in New York. In a tranquil garden, the ambassador's statue gazed up at the stars. The inscription read, "She died so that billions could live free." Kelsara stood before the monument for a long time. She was only 8 when Elena was executed, too young to understand what was happening. But she grew up in a republic that existed because of that execution, because Elena knew she would lose her life for it, but she never gave in. "My grandfather was in the Imperial Guard," she told the instructor quietly. "He was present at the execution. He never spoke about it, but after he died, I found his diary. He wrote that he knew it was wrong but was afraid to say anything. He spent the rest of his life regretting it." Her teacher, a human man named Professor Williams, nodded. "Many people regret what happened. The question is how we deal with that regret. Your grandfather's generation failed to stop the Empire, but your generation can make sure it never happens again." Kelsara laid a flower at the statue's base. "I want to be like her," she said. "I want to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. That's why I'm studying diplomacy." "She would be so proud," Professor Williams said. Elena believed that every species had the potential for greatness. "You prove her right." 10 years after the founding of the Federation, Admiral Chen once again stood at the podium in the center of the chamber. He was older, his hair gray, but his eyes were still sharp. He had been asked to speak on the anniversary of Elena's execution, a federal holiday now called Vasquez Day, celebrating peaceful resistance and the rule of law. 10 years ago, we were at a crossroads," he said. "We could have responded to Elena's murder with revenge. They could have destroyed Valdras Prime, scattered its people, and made an example that would be remembered for millennia. That was exactly what many wanted." He paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. But Elena would not have wanted that. She had dedicated her life to the belief that all sentient beings deserve dignity, justice, and freedom. Honoring her memory with genocide would have been the ultimate betrayal. Chen held up a holographic display showing Federation statistics. 23 species are now full members of the Federation. Our economies have collectively grown by 4. Medical cooperation has eradicated 17 major diseases. Cultural exchange programs have produced art, music, and literature that we could never have imagined on our own. And more statistics have been released. Violent conflict between species has decreased by 8. Life expectancy across Federation worlds has increased by an average of 15. Educational opportunities have expanded, reaching 3 billion people who had no opportunity to learn under Imperial rule. He saw representatives from Valdras. "The people of Valdras have made remarkable progress. You transformed the economy, embraced democratic reform, and became one of the Federation's strongest advocates for justice and equality. Not because we forced you to, but because you chose to." A Valdras senator rose up. It was Valkara, one of the younger generation who had led the reform movement on Valdras Prime. "Admiral Chen, if you please." "Of course, Senator. We of Valdras bear the burden of the Empire's sins," Valkara said. "That burden will never be fully lightened. But the Federation has given us something we never expected: forgiveness and the opportunity to become better people. My generation grows up learning about the Empire's mistakes, but also how to avoid repeating them. We are taught that strength comes from cooperation, not domination." She looked at Chen. "Humanity didn't just defeat us. You showed us a better way to live in the galaxy, and for that we are grateful." Chen felt emotion tighten in his throat. This is what Elena risked her life for. Not just the end of the Empire, but the transformation of the people. Doc Kono stood up to present her report on the Federation's development plans. She was 70 years old,
but as insightful as ever. We have learned important lessons in the last decade. Most importantly, she said, we cannot force species to cooperate. We can only create situations where cooperation is more beneficial than conflict. She cited examples from across Federation space. The Crush folk and Shard folk had been enemies for 3,000 years, fighting over a mineral-rich asteroid. Under Imperial rule, the two groups had been forcibly separated. In the Federation, the Shards helped establish cooperative mining operations to crush and process minerals, navigating the dangerous environment. Today, the Shards are the Federation's largest supplier of minerals, and with many Shards intermarrying, hybrid heraldic Shard families are becoming common. Many more have followed. Isolated tribes are now connected, impoverished worlds are thriving, and accumulated knowledge is freely shared, but Okono cautioned that we are not perfect. There is still conflict, there is still inequality, and there is still work to be done. The difference is that we now have the mechanisms to resolve the problem peacefully, and the will to continue the effort. Captain Rivera, now a general and commander of the Federal Defense Forces, has released a security report. The good news is that large-scale conflict has virtually disappeared. The hard news is that we face new threats. There's organized crime taking advantage of increased trade, extremist groups seeking to restore the empire or establish a new hierarchy, and the occasional rebel planet that rejects the principles of the Federation. He showed us a map of the problem areas. We've responded by forming specialized units that combine the strengths of our species. Human tacticians work alongside collision prevention specialists and Lumina infiltration experts. We have disrupted 3 major criminal organizations, foiled 2 attempted coups on member planets, and rescued hostages from extremist groups. We will only use force when all other options have been exhausted, and we will use only the minimum amount of force necessary. We are peacekeepers, not conquerors, Rivera said, adding that key principles remain unchanged. After the formal presentation, Chen walked the hallways of Solaris Reach, now Unity Station. He passed lounges where people of different species socialized, cafeterias serving cuisines from 2,000 different worlds, and classrooms where children of all types studied side by side. He stopped at an observation deck to gaze up at the stars. A hand touched his shoulder. It was Dr. Okonkwo. She asked, thinking of Elena. I always wondered what she would think about all this, whether we were fulfilling her life-threatening mission. Chen admitted. Okonkwo smiled. I've known Elena longer than you, before she was an ambassador, before she was famous, when she was a young diplomat, struggling to make a difference. Want to know what she thought? Chen nodded. She would point out everything we were doing wrong, Okono said with a laugh. She would give us a list of problems we needed to solve, seeds we were ignoring, policies that needed reform. Elena was never satisfied with good enough. She always wanted better. And Chen asked, I'm sure she'll tell you she's proud of us anyway. Okono said gently, because we're trying, because we haven't given up, because we have a lot of flaws, but we keep making things better than before. They stood together in silence, watching ships arrive and depart, carrying people from across the galaxy. 20 years after the fall of the Valdras Empire, the Federation had grown to encompass nearly 300 species, some great civilizations spanning hundreds of worlds, others single-planet cultures striding for the stars. All were equal members. The throne room on Valdras Prime had been converted into the Imperial History Museum. Millions of people visit every year to see the dismantled throne, the record of the Empire's crimes, and most importantly, the memorial to its victim. The highlight was the Elena Vasquez exhibition, which chronicled her life, work, and final moments. Visitors could hear her final speech and see the courage in her eyes as she faced death. The exhibit concluded with a question written in 2,000 languages. What would you do? Kelsara, now 30 and a low-ranking Federation diplomat, had brought her daughter to the museum. The daughter was 6 years old, half Valdras and half human. The product of a marriage to a human diplomat, Kelsara had met at the academy. These marriages were becoming more and more common. Why did you kill my mother? The girl asked, looking up at Elena's statue with wide eyes. Because my mother spoke the truth, Kelsar said. The Tsar was afraid of the truth, and he thought killing her would make the truth go away. But it did the opposite. Her death made everyone see the truth more clearly. Was she scared? Carol asked, looking at Elena's face carved in stone at the moment of her defiant final speech. Maybe, but she had the courage to do the right thing even when she was scared. That's true courage. Her daughter thought, I want to be brave like her, and kind, Kelela said. Be honest. Stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. That's the way to honor her memory. Admiral Chen died peacefully at the age of 92, 50 years after Elena's execution. His death was mourned throughout the Federation. His funeral was attended by representatives of all member species,
and memorial services were held on 1,000 worlds. He was buried in a surface cemetery, overlooking the ocean. His gravestone was simple: James Chen, Admiral, Diplomat, and Peacemaker. Next to his grave, another headstone was erected. It read, "In memory of Elena Vasquez. Her sacrifice made all of this possible." At the funeral, the now elderly Dr. Okonkwo gave the eulogy. James worried that we had not done enough, that Elena's death had placed even greater demands on us. But look what we have built. 300 species living in peace. Billions of creatures, free to pursue their own destinies. Children growing up without fear of subjugation or oppression. If that's not enough, I don't know what is. She looked out at the gathered mourners, all species united in grief and respect. James and Elena were right about one thing: humanity's strength lies not in our weapons or our technology, but in our ability to see others as equals, to build bridges instead of walls, and to believe that cooperation triumphs over domination. The Commonwealth is not perfect, it never will be, but it exists. It endures, and it gives hope to billions. That is Elena's legacy, and James's legacy, and it is up to all of us to carry it forward. 75 years after Elena's execution, the Federation has grown to over 400 species across 15 galactic sectors. New challenges have emerged: contact with civilizations outside of Federation territory, resource control on an unprecedented scale, how to govern so much diversity without losing sight of the principles that have made the Federation function. But the foundations remain unshakable. No species dominated another. Decisions required consensus. Power rotated, and every year on Vasquez Day the entire Federation paused to remember the diplomat who had given his life so that billions of people could live in freedom. In a classroom on a remote planet, an insectoid teacher was teaching a group of children about galactic history. He showed them footage of the Valdres Empire, explaining how it had ruled the galaxy through fear and force. But the teacher said one human diplomat rejected fear, and that changed everything. A young student stretched out his arm and leg. "Teacher, did humans become the new empire? Did humans take over after Valdres was destroyed?" The teacher smiled. "That's the interesting part. Maybe they had power, but they chose differently. They chose to share it, to build together, to create something in which everyone had a say." "Why?" another student asked. "If you have power, why give it away?" The teacher said they understood something Valdres never learned. True strength comes not from standing above others, but from standing beside them. Students reflected on this as they viewed photos of Elena Vasquez, Admiral Chen, Dr. Okonkwo, and the countless others who built the Commonwealth. That's why we study history, not to remember fallen empires but principles that endure, not to honor conquerors but those who chose peace. The teacher said, not to worship power but to understand why they chose equality. Lessons ended, and the children filed out to play. Dozens of species mingled freely, as always and as unimaginable. They were of the Federation generation, strangers to the Empire, strangers to oppression, strangers to a galaxy where some races rule and others serve. They were all Elena's children, her future heir. After she died to create, somewhere in the eternal darkness between the stars, her spirit may look down on what humanity and its allies have built, smiling, knowing her sacrifice was not in vain. The Empire executed the human diplomat, but from that execution came something the Empire never imagined, a galaxy where equals stood together and were free at last. The throne was empty, but that was exactly how it should be.